June 13th, 1814. Strathnava, Scotland. Sellar rides into the valley with torches. 430 families live here. By nightfall, 250 houses are burning simultaneously. An old woman named Margaret Mackay can't walk. They set her roof on fire anyway. She dies 5 days later. This wasn't war. This wasn't invasion. This was a landlord clearing her own tenants. And it was just the beginning. In 100,000 Scots would vanish from these hills. They didn't leave. They were erased. But to understand what was lost, you have to understand what existed before. The Scottish Highlands in the 18th century weren't empty. 30% of Scotland's population lived in these hills. Families, communities, a civilization. And they had a word for their connection to the land. Duthchas. Duthchas meant more than ownership. It meant belonging. Your family had lived on this soil for 500 years, 20 generations. Your great-great-great-grandfather had seen the same mountains you saw every morning. When you were born, your mother held you up to face those mountains. And when you died, same earth as your ancestors. Imagine someone burning down the house where your great-grandparents were born, and where your grandchildren were supposed to live. That was duthchas. And that's what they destroyed. The land didn't belong to you. You belonged to the land. The clan chiefs understood this. They weren't owners. They were trustees, protectors. The people farmed the valleys, raised cattle, spoke Gaelic, sang songs that had been passed down for centuries. It wasn't a rich life, but it was theirs. And then something changed. The chiefs went to London. They saw wealth. They wanted it. And someone told them a simple truth. Sheep are more profitable than people. A sheep doesn't demand fair rent. A sheep doesn't get sick. A sheep doesn't have children who need schools. A sheep just produces wool. And wool meant money. So the chiefs stopped being protectors. They became landlords, and their people, the families who had trusted them for generations, became a problem to be solved. There's a statue on a Scottish hillside today, a 30-meter monument to one of these landlords. Twice people have tried to destroy it. Twice it survived. We'll come back to that. First, let me introduce you to the people who emptied Scotland. How does 100,000 people simply vanish? Someone had to make it happen. Elizabeth Levison Gower, Countess of Sutherland, owned 1.5 million acres, the largest private landholding in Europe. Her husband was called the richest man who ever died. She believed she was helping her tenants, improving their lives, moving them to the coast where they could fish, learn new trades, become civilized. She wrote letters about civilizing them from her London townhouse, but she never visited during the evictions. Patrick Sellar, her factor, her enforcer, did the work she wouldn't watch. He rode into villages personally, oversaw the burning, and watched the families flee. When Margaret Mackay died after her home was set ablaze, Sellar was charged with murder. The jury? Other landlords. The verdict? Not guilty. 1 week later, Sellar leased the land he had just cleared for his own sheep. But there was a third figure, and what he did makes the others look almost restrained. Colonel John Gordon, owner of 6 slave plantations in Tobago, received £25,000 when Britain abolished slavery. That's £100 million in today's money, compensation for losing his 1,383 slaves. He used that money to buy Scottish Islands, Barra, South Uist, and Benbecula. What he did to the people living there, we'll get to that. For now, understand this. The clearances weren't chaos. They weren't accidents. They were policy. Deliberate. calculated. They decided people were worth less than sheep. And then they proved it, starting with a day the Scots still call Bliadna and Losgaid, the year of the burnings, June 13th, 1814. Donald MacLeod was 20 years old, a stonemason with a pregnant wife waiting in the next valley. He watched his world disappear. 250 houses burning at the same time. The fires lasted 6 days. At night, boats in the harbour navigated by the light of burning homes. Strathneva, 430 families, 2,000 people, gone in one operation. The method was deliberate. They didn't just evict people. They burned the roofs so no one could return, destroyed the crops so there was nothing to come back to, killed the livestock so there was no reason to stay. MacLeod wrote it down. Every detail. The screaming, the running, the old people who couldn't run at all. Margaret Mackay, bedridden, paralyzed, was carried out of her burning home by neighbors. The smoke had already filled her lungs. She died 5 days later. Patrick Sellar watched it happen. He reportedly said 4 words. She lived too long. He was never punished. He got richer, and the clearances spread. Isle of Rum. 1825. Population 450 people. Fishermen, farmers, children. The landlord, Dr. Lachlan MacLean, did the math. People require houses, schools, medicine. Sheep require grass. July 11th, 1826. The entire population was loaded onto 2 ships bound for Nova Scotia, every man, woman, and child. A shepherd who watched them leave wrote, "A wild outcry of men and heartbreaking wails of women and children filled the air." By 1828, the population of Rum was 0. The replacement, 8,000 sheep. The irony? The sheep farming failed within 13 years. MacLean went bankrupt, but the people were already gone. There was no one left to come back. Across the Highlands, the same scene repeated. Village after village, valley after valley. People out, sheep in. 15,000 people evicted from Sutherland alone, replaced by 200,000 sheep. Now, Colonel Gordon, remember him? The man who received £100 million in today's money for his slaves. August 11th, 1851. Lochboysdale, South URSST. Gordon called a meeting. Compulsory. When the islanders arrived, they found police waiting, and ships in the harbour. Catherine McPhee watched it happen. Her words, "I have seen big, strong men, champions of the countryside, the stalwarts of the world, being bound on the quay and cast into the ship as would be done to a batch of horses or cattle. 3,000 people, handcuffed, forced onto ships, families separated on the docks. They called them coffin ships for a reason. Death rates reached 50% on some crossings. Typhus, cholera, dysentery, starvation. In 1847 alone, 17,465 people died at sea. So many bodies were thrown overboard that one witness wrote, "Sharks could be seen following the ships." Another wrote, "If headstones could be erected on the ocean, the sea would look like one great cemetery." Those who survived reached Canada with nothing. No money, no tools, no knowledge of how to survive a Canadian winter. The Mi'kmaq, indigenous people who had every reason to let them die, saved many of them instead. For those who stayed, life wasn't much better. Bad Bear, a village built on a cliff edge in Caithness, housed displaced families who had nowhere else to go, so they built homes on rocks overlooking the North Sea. The wind was so strong that mothers tied their children to stakes in the ground so they wouldn't be blown over the cliff. This wasn't a metaphor. This was survival. The last resident of Badbeer left in 1911. For nearly 70 years, no one fought back. The landlords had the law, they had the money, they had the army if they needed it. The Highlanders had nothing. And then, in 1882, something changed. Not because the landlords softened, but because the crofters had finally had enough. April 19th, 1882. Braes, Isle of Skye. For 70 years the crofters had accepted their fate. Burned out, shipped out, pushed to cliff edges where they tied their children to the ground. But Lord MacDonald, owner of 150,000 acres, had just denied them grazing rights on Ben Lee. Land their families had used for generations, land that was useless to him, land he simply didn't want them to have. This time, they said no. 50 police officers marched up from Glasgow. Their orders were clear. Arrest the troublemakers, restore order, remind these people who owns the land. What they found stopped them cold. 100 crofters, maybe 200, stood in the road. Men in the front, women behind them, children watching from the hillside. They were armed with sticks, stones, nothing else. The sergeant gave the order. The police advanced. The crofters didn't move. For a moment, nobody breathed. 70 years of burning. 70 years of coffin ships. 70 years of silence. And then, a stone flies. The crofters charged, women and men together, sticks against batons, rocks against uniforms. The police line broke. Officers stumbled, fell, retreated. They ran back through Portree, past the shops, past the church. The townspeople lined the streets, not to help the police, but to hiss at them. 5 crofters were arrested that day. They became the most famous men in Scotland. The government panicked. It sent 400 Marines to Skye, but it was too late. The Napier Commission launched. 775 crofters testified in Gaelic. For the first time, the world heard their story. June 25th, 1886. The Crofters Holdings Act passed, the Magna Carta of the Gaels, security of tenure, fair rents, the right to pass land to your children. After 100 years of burning and deportation, they won. But the victory came too late for 100,000 who were already gone. Today, 8 people live per square kilometre in the Scottish Highlands, fewer than Siberia, fewer than the Sahara, one of the emptiest landscapes in Europe. The villages are still there. You can walk through them. Stone walls crumbling into heather, doorways that open onto nothing, fireplaces that haven't been warm in 200 years. In 1750, 1 in 4 Scots spoke Gaelic. Today, it's 1 in 100. A language that survived for 1,000 years, nearly erased in 2 generations. The diaspora spread everywhere: Nova Scotia, Ontario, the Appalachians, Australia, New Zealand. Today, more people with Highland blood live outside Scotland than inside it. Millions trace their ancestry to people who didn't emigrate. They were deported. Remember that statue? The 30-metre monument to the Countess of Sutherland? It still stands. On Ben Baraggy, overlooking the land she emptied. In 1994, someone tried to blow it up. It survived. In 2011, protesters tried to tear it down stone by stone. It survived that too. Some say it should be destroyed. Others say it should stay, as evidence. A permanent reminder of what was done. And Badbeer, the cliff village where mothers tied their children to the ground, the last resident left in 1911. A monument stands there now, erected by a descendant who emigrated to New Zealand. He never saw Scotland again. 100,000 Scots vanished in one generation. The Highlands never recovered, and perhaps they never will. If stories like this matter to you, if you think these forgotten chapters of history deserve to be told, subscribe and hit the bell.